I'm Glenn Williamson. I am involved in this group as a gentle observer of watching some very strong professionals get together on what I think is a good cause. I was telling the mayor that that's the first time I sat up at the mayor's chair and I was looking for the eject button and I couldn't find it, but they have every other cool toy up there. So Mayor, what a great place, but I do like the book and keeping the rules and regs. That's very smart. I am the CEO of the Canada-Arizona Business Council, and I am also involved with the Canadian government. I am the honorary consul for Canada in the state of Arizona, and I am the CEO, not the CEO, I'm the chairman of EPCOR Water, which serves a lot of this area out here. I have been a friend of this city for quite some time, and one of my favorite mayors runs this city, so when I am asked to come out, I come out and do what I am told. So with that, I would like to introduce Mayor Wolcott, if you'd come up and open this up a little bit and give us an idea of what you want to.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome to the City of Surprise. I'm just so delighted to have you here with us today, and this is a very exciting discussion on expanding Canadian healthcare in the USA. Now, earlier this year, I had the pleasure of visiting Toronto with the Economic Development Department and had the chance to meet with former Prime Minister Turner and Mark Keeley, who you'll meet today. During this visit, we participated in a roundtable discussion on the future of Canadian healthcare. This discussion sparked a vision of a great partnership with our Canadian friends and fostered by the community's aspirations, our community's aspirations, to develop a global center of excellence. Surprise was one of the first communities to join the Canada-Arizona Business Council and recognizes the still untapped potential of the enormous relationship between Arizona and Canada. In February, at the Surprise State of the City event, I announced the launch of a cross-border healthcare task force aimed at exploring how Surprise could serve as a pilot location for a growing, emerging Canadian medical travel market. I asked Economic Development Director Janine Yurkovic and Mark Keeley with Keeley and Associates to co-chair this task force. At this morning's event, I hope you'll join me in supporting this important discussion, and please join me in thanking Honorary Consul Glenn Williamson for moderating today and facilitating the panel's discussion. Thank you ever so much for being here with all of us today. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I'd also like to acknowledge some other officials that are here. Vice Mayor Todd, where are you? Todd Tandy, Councilman Skip Hall. Is Skip here? He's going to be a little, that's right, he mentioned that. He was going to be a nudge. Councilman Roland Winters. And Councilman Ken Ramley. And I understand Patrick Duffy can't make it and is not available, the final councilman. So what I'd like to do is, before we bring the panel up, I'd like to take a little bit of time to put this Canadian story into context so you see where we are coming from when we look at opportunities like this. So let's start with Canada by the numbers. $4.4 billion in bilateral trade between Canada and Arizona. It hasn't fluctuated a lot in the last 4 or 5 years, stays very much the same. Most of it is aerospace, defense, and high-paying jobs. Of that, we are looking at, if you go to the second side, you'll see 350 Canadian companies, everything from Circle K to Neiman Marcus to Saks. I can go down the list, you'll know the brands are all operating here. The most recent one to come into the state of Arizona is a 27,000 person company based in Toronto called Celestica, who just took over Honeywell Aerospace's operations in Tucson. And we are seeing more and more of that start to occur. 146,000 jobs are directly underneath these 350 Canadian companies that are in this market. The 1 million Canadian visits a year is from 0 to about 15 or 20 days. What we don't show on that is a subsection of that called snowbirds. And in the state of Arizona, we have not counted snowbirds as an asset class since I've been here, and I've been here 32 years. So I am now looking at this. We see about $1 billion in Canadian spend off of the million Canadians that are here. We see an additional $1.4 billion in spend coming from snowbirds alone during a 4-month period. And that does not include houses and cars and furniture. So we know that this group of people is an accreting group that is going on here in the state. 4.4 million go to Florida each year, about 1.8 million to Nevada, and about 1.6 million to California. Arizona is the fastest growing Canadian component. The 176 flights a week, we just finished calculating the new flights in Mesa Gateway Airport and the new Montreal direct flight that starts on February 22nd, and we will now have 200 nonstop direct flights between Arizona and Canada a week. Nothing going into Tucson at this moment in time. That's 200 a week. And what we're also starting to see is an increase in aircraft size. We're starting to see these aircraft go from 600s to 800s, which is from 113 people to 186 people. The 9 flights that have gone into Mesa Gateway, just to give you an idea, are flying out of Edmonton and Calgary. They are running at 98% load factors right now on the 800 size aircraft. We anticipate the Montreal flight is going to do very much a similar type of thing. Toronto has already gone to wide body aircraft, so they've already bumped up their side of it. The resident property owners, we did in the math on this, we work with the Maricopa Association of Governments. That 20,000 was about 46,000 a couple of years ago during the recession. Something interesting happened. We watched Canadians sell their houses that were standalone homes and buy condominiums and rent apartments for the 4 or 5 months. So when the house sales went down, we didn't notice anything but an accretion going up in the amount of Canadians still coming here. So that is really important to understand, that house sales down, apartment and condos up. Of the 2.7 billion last year spent in commercial real estate, Canadian developers used 1.2 billion of that, 900 million, 5 people, and they were all condos and apartments. So they were actually building to that market and getting it going where they go. The 20 days average length of stay that you're looking at on this chart is a tourism number, not a snowbird number. The snowbird number is 4 months, with an extension in a lot of cases to 5. There is right now being put in front of Congress by it's the Canadian Snowbird Association, but their US part, is a bill that would allow people over 55, Canadians, that are independently wealthy, that are just going to come down here to stay up to 9 months. This changes the whole dynamic of house ownership. This absolutely changes the dynamic of medical needs, wants, and things that are interest in that field. Let me move on to the next one. This is the surprise story that I'm going to wait just a little bit more to talk about, because I think it's very important that Janine Yurkovich talks about this and gives us a little bit of insight. So with that, what I'd like to do is invite the panel to come up. I've given you a little bit of what's going on the size of Canada, but if Mark Keeley, the CEO of Keeley & Associates and Canada Task Force member, could join us. Janine Yurkovich, the Surprise Economic Development Director and the Task Force co-chair as well. Chris McLeod, partner with Cambridge Limited in Toronto, the Canadian Task Force side. Rhonda Anderson, former CEO of Carden Children's Hospital and now CEO of RMA Consulting and Surprise Task Force member. And Nolan Charles, a member of the Musqueam Indian Band from Vancouver, Canada. We are honored to have you here, Nolan. Thank you very much for coming. So with these people, you can imagine they have been having meetings. They've been going up to Toronto. They've been coming back and forth. The mayor alluded to the political high-level connectivity that she and the former Prime Minister of Canada had. And what is now happening is we're starting to see data and we're starting to see work product come up that we think is very, very important. So I'm going to stand down here, if you don't mind, stay closer to this, and I'm going to move off to the side, but I'm going to ask a question and then I will come back up. So Mark, the first question's for you.
Oh, boy.
I was going to ask Janine, but I decided to switch this around just a little bit because I know you're going to jump right on top of it.
Yeah, you always have the upper hand with that.
So, why Canada, why Surprise, and why now?
Well, listen, first of all, I want to thank you, Your Worship, and your council for being so open to us for this exciting, we think it's an exciting initiative. And I really, Councillor General, I really want to say thank you to you, not only because you're a really good moderator, but you've embraced this whole program from the start. Her Worship, and by the way, in Canada, we call mayors Your Worship. So she gets a little bit angry at me for calling her Worship because everybody seems to make fun of it down here. But we're really polite in Canada. It's a national sport to be polite in Canada. But I really think it's a testament to you, Mayor, for when you came to Toronto, and you said it right too. We don't say Toronto, we say Toronto, like you did. So very, very good. We had a very rich discussion around what are the attributes that this city has, and that is a lot of Canadians come here. And look, this is not an issue that for all intents and purposes, is really unique to Surprise or even Arizona. There are lots and lots and lots of Canadians who come down to the United States, especially in warm weather states, in the months of October, November, December, January, February, March, and April. And why? Because it's really cold in Canada in those months. But not only that, it's really, really affordable down here in the United States. Somebody was telling me earlier on today, sorry for taking a little bit of time to answer your question, Council General, but somebody was saying earlier on today, wow, I have a 4,000 square foot home here that's $500,000. Are you kidding? In the city of Toronto, a 4,000 square foot home is $6 million. So when you think about cost and you think about justification for these kinds of things, Canadians logically would come down here in droves because it's really affordable. The same thing with labor costs. In Canada, our labor costs are exponentially higher, not because we have a higher cost of living, because our costs of living are pretty much the same, but it's the economies of scale. And so when we look at this in the context of your question, Council General, why this city? Why now? We have been trying in Canada for a long period of time to have this kind of what we'll call medical travel opportunities for Canadians who want to come down for protracted periods of time to warmer places and not have to worry about their health care. It is a fundamental problem in Canada, that especially when you're looking at snowbirds, as you suggested, Council General. The snowbirds are very interesting people. In Canada, people might say, wow, a snowbird is a one percenter. They're multi-gazillionaires. They have lots and lots of money. They fly down here in their private jets. Not so. They are indexed pensioners, folks who have said, I want to do this in the latter part of my life when I retire. And so it's logical from our perspective to suggest that maybe if that's indeed the case, we should have, if they want to, if they're, you talked about needs and wants, Glenn, if there's an opportunity to have follow those patients, their Canadian health care, because it's a sacred trust for Canadians, then this is a logical place to do that, largely because you've opened your doors like you have. So we have made a considered decision, and we, in our company, we design and we manage emergency medical systems and these kinds of healthcare facilities, and we've done it all over the world. We haven't, and no Canadian company has done anything of this magnitude in the United States. Although there are entrepreneurial Americans in this business who are saying, why wouldn't you come to Florida and do this? Why wouldn't you come to New Mexico? Why wouldn't you come to the Carolinas? Why wouldn't you come to Georgia? And I guess it takes a lot for a mayor and a council of a city like this to say, I got to go up there, I got to talk to this place, and I got to make sure that I got the right message and the right attractiveness to get them to buy in. And by virtue of what we've done, we seem to think that this is a wonderful opportunity, and we're prepared to exploit it, if that's the right word.
Thank you very much, Mark. Janine, I have to ask you a question. Here you are sitting in Surprise. Mark is very eloquent and a great salesman, and he can push it. I'm going to make sure the mic is turned on for you too. I just noticed that. Here you go. Why did you put this together? You're an economic development director. What made you poke your head into the healthcare of international visitors?
We began to really look at this opportunity. So when we started looking at Canada, it's very natural for an Arizonan to want to go due north to Western Canada. Culturally, we're a lot alike. It's closer and so forth. But as we mined the opportunity, we wanted to really go somewhere where other Arizonans weren't going. So we looked at the map. We did our homework, and we figured out that there's just a lot of economic activity happening in the Toronto market, and further. There's a lot of global activity happening. So it's really not just a Canadian market any longer. It's really the world's market. So there's 180 languages spoken and so on and so forth. So we began for our first year really fundraising in the market and really figuring out, is this a market for us? And as we began talking to people, we were astonished. There is a lot of positive market awareness of Arizona in Eastern Canada. And as we began even going further and talking to people, I think that people are looking for, there's a lot of market opportunities and people are aware, but people are looking for more information about Arizona. Gosh, I've heard about it. Tell me more. And so we began uncovering a lot of great relationships, and we found out that we probably had something here. And we, from a business perspective, we found that it made a lot of sense for people in the Northeast and Eastern Canada to look at Arizona from a proximity play. So if you're in the Northeast and then you go to the U.S. Southwest, you have a North American strategy. So that's a great business strategy. But from a quality of life strategy, again, as Mark said, people are astonished at how many Canadians are already here. There's already a welcoming market. And further, there's more and more opportunities to grow. It's not a saturated, there's so many here, but it's not saturated, I think is the point. There's so much more potential. So, and Surprise in particular, just layered on top of that, we're a market that we like to welcome new people. We like to pilot new things. We're a very young community. We, for example, started an incubator 8 years ago when there was really no incubator in the West Valley, and there weren't really many in Arizona at that time. We like to try new things. We're a new community. I always somewhat humorously try to say, when you're a city called Surprise, you have to be interesting. So we like to try new things. And, as we looked at this concept and got to know Mark and made these wonderful relationships, we found out there's another way that we can be a great service provider. This is an untapped opportunity, and we want to be a pilot for this. Again, Surprise likes to get out in the forefront. We're young. We don't have a fixed process about the way healthcare should be, about the way services should be delivered. We're very open. So from our perspective, this was almost a natural fit, even though it's a very new approach.
Thank you very much, Janine. We're fortunate enough we have some senior representatives from Dignity here. We've got some people from Mayo. Mayo, you guys have been playing at this game for a little while with your Rochester facility. Are we starting to see something, and this is to Chris, are we starting to see something now that is starting to scale a little bit more? And why is that happening? What's going on in the Canadian healthcare system that is causing this type of scaling of using U.S. services?
Great question. In Canada, we have extremely long wait lists for some basic procedures. Quick anecdote. My mom, I'm originally from Saskatchewan, has been on a wait list for a hip replacement for well over a year. Finally, we have a date, November 22nd. Well, we missed the spring, we missed the summer. Great times to do post-op rehab. Her post-op rehab will be December, January and February. Not ideal in Saskatchewan, where it's minus 40 degrees Celsius. Well, you're going to be hitting plus 30 Celsius. So we've got a systemic problem. 18 million people, Mark reminded us last night, will be over the age of 65 by 2030. So a lot of the procedural pieces of surgery, whether it's ortho, hip replacement, knee replacement, need to occur. And I think one of the geniuses of what Surprise has done is create or at least capture a real opportunity that exists. I'd almost change it from expand Canadian healthcare to deliver Canadian healthcare to Canadians in a climate and a community that's welcoming and enduring. That's really what this is about. And it's a phenomenal idea. And I find it really typical, innovative American spirit to see this occurring here. I mean, Surprise really is one of the best kept secrets in the United States. While some pretty amazing US cities are showcasing their stuff right now to bring Amazon. I was watching the videos, Boston, Detroit, Atlanta, great video pitches. Well, in the meantime, Surprise, when no one else is pitching, has come up with a brilliant platform and plan to deliver a multi-billion-dollar opportunity to the state of Arizona. Not enough Canadians know about the Southwest. The numbers are clear. There's a lot that are already engaged, but the room for growth is tremendous. So I think you're right on track. And on your point or your question, Glenn, is this the scale? I think it is. And it's the systemic problem we currently have in the Canadian system that's creating that opportunity. So this is American innovation and entrepreneurship at its best. And to see it coming from a municipal government is really amazing. And you've got a great council. We were out with everyone last night, and I've got to say, one of the most proactive, positive discussions I've had with government officials in living memory. It's great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Rhonda, this question's for you. You've run a hospital. You know the inner workings of this. How complex a problem has Surprise taken on? There's a certain innocence in the fact that this is coming out of Surprise, and it's not coming out of some massive institutional group that's working on it that seems to be allowing it to move forward. Are there going to be road bumps that are going to be like really bad, or are there going to be what are the things that you see in this that say it shouldn't work?
Well, I'm going to talk about why it should work.
Here, here.
God bless you.
So I'll take that. It means you found nothing that says it shouldn't.
No, but I'll talk a little bit about that as well.
Okay.
I think the most important thing as we think about this work, and I'm so just enamored by what the mayor and the council are talking about, because the person that's at the center of it is the patient, the person who might need some health care when they're here, and or a person who might want health care here that is not from this country. And if we keep that at the center, then I think Council General, that we will really will hit some roadblocks, but they won't be horrible. I think that was your word, or terrible. There'll be some that we'll have to stop and think about. But if we really do an excellent plan, and one of the things that we need to do as part of that planning process is to have some interaction with the Canadians that are already here and understand what they want and need, because every culture wants and needs something different. The other aspects I think that are really so important is to understand is that this isn't an episodic thing. So you don't go someplace and have a hip done and then that you're done. There's a continuum. You have preparation and coming. You have the surgical procedure. There's a lot of post-op management, which includes or probably includes rehab. And when you think about that, and then the transition back to home, there are many, many components. So to your point, Council General, there are many components of what needs to be designed, but I don't believe there are ruts in the road. I believe there might be a small bump here and there that we would work together on. And the people who will help us work that through are the people who would be using the services.
Thank you. This is open to the panel. China and Mexico are going after this as well. And how do they fit into America and what you're talking about doing here?
Can I,
Yeah, please.
I'm a little shy, so I'm gonna, it's very interesting you make that point about those two nations, Glenn. I got to tell you a funny story. We had this meeting in Toronto, and there was a lovely report that was commissioned, and then we'd had some discussion between the city and our company, and we started the task force by fiat from the mayor. But I found this really fascinating. I got a phone call, unsolicited, by a fella who is the consul general for Mexico in Los Angeles. Now, think about this just for a second. He says to me, "Oh, Mr. Keeley, I understand something's happening in a little place called Surprise. I've got several governors coming to Los Angeles to talk about some issue, and we'd heard about what you're doing. We'd like that in Mexico." Now, let me be clear about why he called. There are an awful lot of Canadians that go to Mexico, and they go to either side, whether it's the Yucatan Peninsula or even down in Cabo. There are Canadians who are buying large pieces of property to build massive estates, or there are others who do the snowbird routine in whether it's in a place called Merida or in Cancun, Playa del Carmen, and that area of the Yucatan Peninsula. But one of the things that has become very, very limited for Mexico is their ability to handle any kind of healthcare issue and the quality concerns that are associated with that if that happens to a Canadian when they're there. So they looked at an opportunity to do some kind of a discussion, which leads me to make this point, Glenn, you talked about this at the outset, that there are other people looking at this model. And not only that, it puts you in a position, apropos to your comments about putting out licitations for this kind of a thing to occur, that puts you in a very unique space in Surprise. China is a different cat, and let me tell you why. We do a lot of work in China and a lot of healthcare work. Our company actually helped the Chinese to develop a law that said, are you ready for this one? You must go home every weekend to visit mom and dad. We had to get the government to make that law to happen because people's moms and dads, their senior citizens, are left alone because everybody works 24 hours a day in Beijing or Shanghai. If you don't believe me, go and see it. It's incredible. So we had to work with the government to say, you must do this. I made a speech in Beijing last February, and they said, could you tell us about what you're doing in Canada with respect to long-term care and healthcare? And I said, sure. So I'm up at the microphone and I said, ladies and gentlemen, here are the demographics of my country. In Canada, by the year 2030, as Chris had said, there will be 18 million Canadians who are over the age of 65. They are rolling on the ground laughing. I'm thinking, what's so funny about what I just said? Well, by 2030 in our country, there will be 280 million people over the age of 65. So if you think we got a problem in Canada or you have a problem in the United States, they got a big, big problem in China. So here's what they did. They said, we have a very unique relationship with your country, Mark. And let me tell you the relationship that Canada has with China. In the Cultural Revolution, there was they called him a barefoot doctor by the name of Norman Bethune, went to China. And he is now revered in history in that country. You could go to any corner of that country, and Norman Bethune is absolutely deified. Based on that, they have a very unique relationship with Canada as it relates to healthcare. So here's an opportunity associated with what we're trying to do here in Surprise, wherein we could say, and they've got a program there in China now, if you follow my stream of consciousness, that people who are now over the age of 65 are in the enviable position of being able to travel outside of their country. And they want to go to great places. They want to go to Arizona. They want to go to Mexico. They want to go to Canada. They want to go to South Africa. They want to go to Switzerland. And they travel for long periods of time. But the beauty of this is they want to go someplace where they can trust that the healthcare is available for them. And if it's Canadian, in Arizona, I don't think there are enough planes that could land in Surprise, and there's enough runway to garner support for all of the planes that will come here from China. This is a remarkable opportunity.
Thank you very much. Nolan, this question's for you.
Yes, sir.
We're very fortunate to have a member of the First Nations of Canada with us today. I'm very interested to hear your perspective on the Canadian healthcare system and how it interfaces with the Indigenous population in Canada and the First Nations that you're associated with.
Thank you, Glenn. And more importantly, I need to acknowledge and thank the tribes of the traditional lands of which I sit today. And I'd like to extend a thank you to the Intertribal Council of Arizona for allowing me this opportunity to come and make this presentation on their traditional lands. I'd be remiss if I didn't do that. Maybe I should give a little bit of background, Glenn, before I tackle the question. First and foremost, I'm Musqueam. Secondly, I am Coast Salish, and Coast Salish runs both sides of the border. It runs, in Canada, we call them bands of Indians. In America, we see designated as tribes or tribal entities. So my Coast Salish runs from Vancouver area. If you're familiar with the West Coast, runs from Vancouver as far south as Seattle. So there's this 49th parallel called the American-Canadian border, which divides us as Coast Salish people. And interestingly, when you say that the demographics of by 2030, 18 million will be over the age of 65. In Aboriginal communities in Canada, the demographics are opposite mainstream, meaning that 50% of my population as it exists is under the age of 25. And I'm looking at this as a business model, and I appreciate and applaud the visionaries like Mark and Janine and the mayor and council of Surprise to look at this as a business opportunity. Just to quickly summarize, we don't have modern day treaties in British Columbia. They established a process in 1993, and we realized more through litigation than we have through negotiation. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about looking at this model, and it's a great model as a business opportunity because we don't have opportunities that that are afforded to our neighbors or our families to the south, like tribal casinos. So we have an obligation to look at, like any responsible government, we have an obligation to look after our constituents. And so our constituents, we look at this as a wonderful business model, as a economic engine. That's why I'm here, to learn. And just a quick overview, Canada is trying to define its relationships with its Indigenous people. And they've recognized that the United Nations Declarations of the Rights of Indigenous People is a reality. So if we've got our Prime Minister at the UN podium saying that we are socially and morally responsible, what is that definition of socially and morally responsible? And like I say, we have an obligation, and that obligation is to create an economic engine. And I applaud this business model because you can take this business model and transfer it and plug it into any other locale. So I hope that kind of in a roundabout way answers your question.
Thank you very much, Nolan. There is an ongoing effort within Canada, I'm sure many of you have been following it, to integrate First Nations and Canadian governments closer and closer and closer. And in outreach specialty programs like this, it is really important for us to have subject matter experts like yourself, Nolan, on panels and involved, and we thank you for that. Rhonda, my next question is for you. I won't make it as draconian as the last one.
Then
So
maybe I should
all of
answer
a
it.
sudden, all these Canadians come down here. Healthcare system in the valley can handle that if that number starts to become a sizable number, do you think?
Well, I think one of the things that we have talked about is that we must partner. It's important to partner with all of our healthcare colleagues around the valley. So that's one of the major aspects of designing a program. How will those partnerships look? What will they actually be doing in various parts of the continuum of care? And then how can we manage that? I'm going to deviate just a little bit again. One of the other jobs that I have is accrediting medical travel programs throughout the world, both domestically and internationally. And so, as Mark and others have said, this is not a new process in terms of medical travel for certain procedures or because people want to go and live in a different climate for a while, et cetera. But one of the most important things is that it isn't a standalone. So most all of those that I have accredited or surveyed and accredited over this last year have partnered and have very strong partnerships with those areas in the community. But the important part of that partnership is that we all have the same objective at the end, and it is that that patient is able to receive all aspects of their care, but transition back to their home when they're ready and want to. And so as those partnerships evolve and we reach out as a team, those will, I think, be able to accommodate, to answer your question, but also be able to be culturally sensitive to what the Canadian individual wants out of their health care.
Thank you very much. Chris, can you tell us, do you anticipate pushback from the provincial healthcare systems on a project that was dangling principles all over the U.S. now going to scale?
I'll be positive and say that there's challenges for sure. Just a quick backdrop on how the Canadian system works. So we talk about Canadian healthcare, but really we're a federal state like the US. There's the federal government, and then there are 10 provinces and 3 territories. The provinces are responsible for healthcare, the administration of healthcare. We have, just on the provincial end, 10 provincial payers. Each province deals with the individuals in that, whether it's Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Ontario. So I think the opportunity that lies here is that Surprise is really making a pitch and saying, all right, we've got a vision and a plan to deliver Canadian healthcare to Canadians in this community and state for all the reasons we've gone through that make it feasible and both from a healthcare perspective for the individual primarily, but also for this community. You now have a competition in Canada between the provinces to see who's going to be the first mover to participate and partner in this. So I think one of the benefits we have, and yeah, there's challenges because whenever you're dealing with a large government entity or bureaucratic operation, anything that's large, it's, people always tend to look for no rather than look for yes. But once you put it into the competitive realm, okay, this is what we're doing. Which payer would like to try it first? Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, each one has different governments. So I think there's yes, Glenn, to answer your question, there are challenges, but the reality is this is helping to solve a problem in the Canadian system. And it's one we do not have a clear answer for. And I think the surprise is it's providing one of the solutions to solve a real vexing problem as the population ages and procedures are needed, having a stable of procedures that could be offered here with significant post-op time for recovery that occurs here in this climate. So Glenn, I hope that helped a little.
Thank you. Rhonda, I just put a slide up, and it shows the 63,459 patients that seem to be coming down to the United States. When you look at that breakdown and you look at the specialties and the capacities and the capability in the valley, what is your impression when you look at this? Do you have any?
Well, most of it will probably be surgical procedures of some sort.
Yeah.
The general surgery, of course, sticks out there, but urology is probably general, so is GYN, et cetera. So they're probably surgical. And I think, we have a lot of great organizations that provide excellent care to be able to help enhance the care for these individuals. But I'm going to go back to one of my comments earlier. It is about the exact intervention that's necessary, important, and the quality is important. But what's really important is to make certain that before that individual comes here for any procedure or any care, that there is a connect with their physician back home, wherever that is, in this case, Canada. And that there is a handoff, if you will, in the transitions to here, where that procedure will be done. But then the post-op management, the rehab, if that's needed for an orthopedic procedure, and the transition back home, whether they're going to fly back home, whether they're going to drive, whatever is happening, and how that information gets shared again with their physician wherever they're going to be cared for when they get back to their home state or home country. I can't emphasize that enough. And all the programs that I deal with right now, internationally and domestically, that do medical travel, that connect is what is absolutely foundational to the quality and safety outcomes. Otherwise, you have unsafe situations if you don't know that individual. So those handoffs are key. And these types of procedures here, mostly surgical, are going to be very, very important because we have to understand the medical component of what that patient might have as another potential complication before we can actually enter into providing this surgical procedure.
Thank you, Mark. You wanted to add?
Yeah, I do. I think I want to take a step back just for a second because this room is full of very smart people who understand healthcare and especially understand this area in terms of the offerings. Let me talk a bit about the entire. Let me give you the story, but I want to talk to you about why this is really timely based on your original comment. In Canada, I'm a former hospital administrator, spent a lot of time running a hospital. And I know in Canada, we have a fundamentally different system. Our system is publicly funded, but it's privately delivered. If you understand that concept, it puts us in a very unique position as Canada. But here's the problem that we have, and I was talking earlier on with somebody when we were comparing the Canadian system to the national health system in the UK. Not particularly similar, but there are a lot of similarities. But let me talk about the uniqueness of our system. What happens in Canada with respect to hospital management is you have varying. We base our management process on what we call global budgeting. So for all intents and purposes, based on your population and based on the acuity, you get a certain amount of money from the government, and your responsibility as a hospital is to manage the resources appropriately. This is where everything becomes very problematic. And I hope to God that people back home in Canada are listening to me, because here's the big problem that we have. You have to make decisions when you're managing a hospital. And you have to make decisions on what programs you're going to provide. And I'm looking at this when we talk about what treatments Canadians are receiving. The essence of this program, or the essence of this project, is to provide for Canadians Canadian healthcare by Canadians as if it were consular services here in the city of Surprise. Think about that just for a second. So that when you come down here, I don't know if anybody talks to Canadians about what they do, but they are the most innovative people when they're snowbirds. And really, when you think about this, they say, I'm going down to my place in Surprise, but I'm only buying a one-way ticket. That is the dumbest thing you could do, but they have to do that because they know if there's an issue, they're going to have to go back home right away. But what that so you teach we're teaching people to do in Canada based on our system is to be innovative that could hurt their healthcare, Rhonda. And this is what is a real big issue for me. So, sorry for rambling on, but I got to finish this. When you think about what happens in Canada, we're not rationing care, we're making decisions. Let's just talk about orthopedics. Chris talked about his mom. But when you look at this, because of global budgeting and decisions that you have to make as a healthcare, as a hospital administrator, you have to ration OR time. So, for example, in Canada, their orthopedics, I'm just going to talk about orthopedics because it was a big issue, and it is a big issue in Canada right now. That if I look at an OR opportunity for orthopedics, I'm rationing, excuse the expression, but I'm going to say it, I'm rationing that orthopedic surgeon's ability to practice to 1 day a week. So they'll do full hips, full knees, or shoulders from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. Now, anybody who knows an orthopedic surgeon, they're mechanics. They like to get their hands inside your knees. They love to get their hands inside your hips. They're mechanics, and they need to keep their competencies. You can't do that in a system where you're rationalizing their ability to practice to 1 day a week. So we talked about this to council, Janine, a couple of months ago, where we said this is a valve release. If we looked at this and said there are right now the wait times in Canada for hips and knees are anywhere from 12 to 18 months. That's unconscionable. Let's even go one step further. I say it, and I want everybody to say he said it, and he's going to get in so much trouble in Canada. It is stupid, really stupid to say in Canada that you should have your hip or your knee done in February. If you've been to Thunder Bay in Canada in February, you'll do a header when you're going outside and break your face because there's so much ice. That's not good health care. So it's great that you could come down here with the Canadian Consular Services for Healthcare to do your rehabilitation, which is really good healthcare. It's just that we're saying the Canadian system, the money should follow that for the Canadians that are down here. And that's the challenge that we have with governments.
Here, here, well said.
So it sounds like we have the weather. It sounds like there is a very high wait time in Canada for services. It sounds like we have the flights to get people up and down. Janine, can you talk to this slide? Because this really tells you where the Canadians are in the valley.
No, well, and I think this slide sort of shows you they're everywhere. This isn't, there isn't just a concentration in Paradise Valley and Scottsdale. There is an enormous concentration in several areas of the valley. But what I think is remarkable, Surprise, I think we're growing so quickly. We're about the 10th largest city in Arizona, but we're not Phoenix, we're not Scottsdale, we're not Mesa, which has 500,000 people. But as you can see, we've got a pretty strong number in the West Valley and particularly in Surprise. And that is an issue of affordability. And what I think that speaks to, back to the issue that Mark sort of brought up earlier, is that this isn't about the wealthy 1%, although they'll come and they'll hang out at the CABC jet event. And that's a great event. And we do have a lot of wealthy Canadians in Arizona, of course. However, this is really about every Canadian from all walks of life. One example I sort of shared yesterday. You're really getting a window, by the way, into our task force discussions, and so it's been sort of fun up here. So one thing, my kids go to school. I went to Canada, and my kids go to school with another kid, and they got invited to a birthday party. So I come back from Canada, and I happen to have a lot of candy and fidget spinners and stuff that are very Canadian looking. So I go to this party, and I drop off a big gift bag full of a present and some Canadian stuff. And the parents, I come to pick my daughter up, and they said, "How did you know we were Canadian?" They're my age. They happen to own the Party Planet in Surprise. So these are not They're entrepreneurs, and so what I think this speaks to is that it's everyone. It's a decent spread of people from all over Canada, and it's not just Alberta, although that's a popular place to be from here, and it's not just Western Canada. It's everywhere, and we joke here that our leaves don't change colors, but our license plates change, and so we get kind of excited when we see our first Canadian license plate in probably October-ish or September, October. So I think this really speaks to that. We have a variety of a population from Canada, and we're so grateful for that. And and I can't say it enough. I mean, there were a few years in this market where Canadians were buying homes that we couldn't afford and buying that overstock, and they saved us. So I think there's also a gratitude from an Arizona perspective. Our attitude is very reciprocal. While I think Canadians have a very positive image of Arizona from the conversations I've had, we have such a positive perspective about Canada. So I think this map really does speak to that, and it speaks to, again, it's not just the wealthy 1% getting on a jet, although they're welcome to come. It's everyone. It's people like us in this room. So that's.
So I think I want to add to that, and going after this Canadian middle class, understand that Canada's relationship with Arizona started in Yuma, Quartzsite, and Apache Junction from Alberta. And it was the middle class that started all this. The upper end is nice gravy on top of it. Remember that in Canada right now, in Toronto and in Vancouver, you're looking at houses in the per square foot level of $1,100 and $1,200 a square foot. Think about that just for a minute. You've lived in the house for 30 years, and your house is now worth what? And we have houses in Arizona going from $100 to $200 that are absolutely stunning homes, $250. This becomes lifestyle changes as well. So we're watching all of these things, all these paradigms all start to shift all at once. And we hear this more and more and more as Canadians are looking at cities like Surprise. This didn't happen by accident. There is you can see a little bit on both the west and the east side, and then somewhere in the middle, it sort of falls off in Phoenix, and then it goes up into Scottsdale. And we've tracked this not only from houses, but land, and we've looked at apartments, and we've looked at condos, and this is a trend that we see moving up more and more and more. Nolan, here you are in Arizona. You have brothers and sisters in this state, and I'm curious to, not only will you go back to your band and have discussions with your families, what do you see as another opportunity for you to interface in medical discussions with your counterparts in this state?
Yeah, the irony of it all, Glenn, it's not going back to my respective community, it's my respective communities, the 633 nations that are in Canada. And I'm looking at this map and I'm grinning because I'm looking at, I've got to come to America to understand America, know how to develop a relationship with Canadians when I can't do that back home. Develop a relationship with Canada, with my nation. So I've got to go elsewhere to help define, because like I say, back in Canada, Canada is looking for an identity. What is our relationship with its Indigenous people? So that's at the forefront, Glenn. And like I say, I'm looking at this map, and the irony of all of it is I've got to leave this country called Canada and visit this great nation called America to help me define a relationship with a government. And so I look at this as a fabulous model that I can take home and share, not only with just a quick overview of the 633 nations in Canada, 197 are in BC alone. So it's all about timing. And I can go back. We have our National Assembly in about 3 weeks in our nation's capital of Ottawa, and I can share with my respective Indigenous leaders to say, well, here's what's going on in Arizona, and here's what we're doing to develop or the great thing about this is we're defining, you're helping me. Everybody in this room is helping me define a relationship between our nations and Canada. I hope that answers your question, because at the end of the day, when I report back to the powers that be in Ottawa in a couple of weeks, we work with our counterparts at the NCAI, the National Congress of American Indians. And the chairman at the present chairman, I think he's still the chairman. I better check the website later. Today is Coast Salish. And I will go back. Brian Cloudesby is a good friend of mine. I can pick up the phone and give him a call and say, hey, Ryan, had an experience in Arizona. So I'll
Thank you.
thank you.
Speed round, 1 minute comments on this entire thing, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. We have a mic that will roam around as well. Rhonda, 1 minute, your overall thinking.
I just think that the mayor and the city council have done a great job. What they're saying is, let's help take care of the individuals that are here already from Canada and expand that opportunity to those that might want to come for other work or other opportunities from a healthcare perspective. I'm so impressed with the work that you're doing. Thank you for doing it.
Janine.
I want to extend a quick thanks to the Surprise Task Force that has volunteered their time on a weekly basis to go through an hour-long conversation with me every week, if you could imagine. Satish, Cheryl, Rhonda, David, Dr. Wen, I'm so grateful that you're with me every week. And so I just want to talk about that. We pulled people together that, honestly didn't really have a dog in the fight. They just thought this was really cool and had a lot of excitement about it and wanted to work on this together. So I want to point that out. I'm really excited to be a part of something. I think we all in this room and part of the healthcare industry, we all know that technology is changing, social media is changing, healthcare is changing. So as part of that changing face of healthcare, I think in the future it's going to be a lot more mobile, just like Dr. Wen has piloted. I think it'll be a lot more wearable, but I think it'll be global in a lot of ways. This world is changing, and I'm so excited to be part of a project that's just really the tip of the iceberg. So thank you.
Thank you very much. By the way, can those other task force members stand up so people know who you are in the room? Thank you very much. Before I jump on to Mark, at dinner last night, we were sort of chatting about this, and I brought up the point where I said, this is almost like NAFTA. This is supply chain healthcare where it should be interoperable, borderless, and be able to flow back and forth. And I give you kudos on that. That's you're breaking a paradigm here. Mark.
I want to also thank the Canadian members of the task force, because when we went down this path, we said, let's have a group of Canadians and a group of Americans. And Chris and Nolan are part of the task force. But in Canada, we have a couple of very well-placed physicians who are on this task force, plus some very well-placed folks in long-term care who are part of our task force. I find it interesting that two of them couldn't come down here because there were no seats available, any flights. That tells me that we're doing the right damn thing. So I thought that was quite interesting. So we'll come down. They say to me, come down in the summertime, and nobody comes down here in the summer. It's 150,000 degrees. But anyway, it's been wonderful, the work that's happening in the cross-border discussion. Also, Consul General, I got to say, and frankly, you're putting yourself out there in a very, very interesting spot, by embracing this such as you are. You know, if you don't know this guy, he rolls his cigars in $1,000 bills. He is a real one percenter, but he understands Canada better than anybody in Canada. And we are really grateful to have not only your moral support, but your unbelievable advice as it relates to how this is going to go forward. So I'm really grateful to you. Just the last point I want to make is this is not only an opportunity for patients, but it's also a practice opportunity for Canadian physicians who otherwise don't get the opportunity to practice more than one day a week if they're orthopedic surgeons in Canada. I'll leave it like that. And if anybody has any questions, happy to answer.
Thanks, Mark. We'll see how my reappointment goes after all
Yeah,
this.
I think the Prime Minister is going to have a word or two with you.
It's sitting on his desk. Chris.
Thanks, and thanks for everyone in Surprise, City Council, the committee members. Enormously friendly, generous welcome, and the groundwork that's being done here is really quite awe-inspiring. It's phenomenal, and as has been said, I think Nolan, you said it, that we're coming from Canada down to Arizona to learn how to repair the Canadian system. It's a great neighbor story. That's where most great things happen. The neighbor, what was it? The neighbor test we were talking about. Talk to your neighbor to figure out how to find a way forward. Other than in the envelope of healthcare, where patients can come, and we've been talking about that. My one takeaway of where this is also going to go, we're at the feasibility study stage, is the amplifier effect. That this really does amplify what's going on and the kind of place that Arizona is. I mean, Canadians, they've got 50 states they look to move to and go south in, and whether it's Florida, California, Texas, across the board. Arizona, there's a lot of Canadians already coming here, but this entire project, I think, is going to amplify, and particularly when it is successful, as I know it will be, it's going to bring in a lot of ancillary businesses and people who come because they love the story. That's why people go to somewhere. They hear a great story about it from friends or family, and they say, I want to be part of that. So let's keep up the great work, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Nolan, can you bring it home?
Bring it home. Short and sweet. I like Janine's comment, change is inevitable. I'm looking at this as changing the relationship between our respective governments back home. And on a personal note, I really like the approach of accelerating the wait times. I went through Crohn's myself, or I suffer from Crohn's. And if I had something like this available to me, I'd be crazy not to capitalize on it, because I had to wait 5 months to have the ostomy reversal, and that it wasn't fun. And so I applaud the visionaries in this room that are looking at change. And I need to thank you, Glenn, because you've been an advocate, and you've been I would say somebody special on this project, and that needs to be acknowledged.
So with that, we have a mic. Does anybody have any questions for the panel? Just put your hand up and the mic will come to you.
Yep, sure. Dr. Steve Ressler from Mayo Clinic, and thank you. It was really enjoyable to hear this from you, and it's resonating with a lot I've been learning recently, being placed in charge of outreach to Canada for the enterprise at Mayo Clinic. I've grown to have a lot of respect, honestly, for what happens in Canada. I got to go to an education conference in Toronto. You have a wonderful education system, tremendous innovation, and I think because of your geographic issues, you guys have been at the forefront of telemedicine, and a lot to learn from that, and a lot of other things. So very impressive, and a lot to be proud of. I guess I've also learned what you guys have reiterated, that within a healthcare system, you sort of pick your poison. And Canadians, based on their values, have embraced a sort of egalitarian approach to things. Say, we really want, it's very important to us to have a basic level of healthcare for everyone. And you got to respect that, and I do respect that. I guess my question is, going forward, what is the appetite within Canada? Understanding that egalitarian approach, but also understanding this needs of the patient come first priority that Ms. Anderson had mentioned. you can't walk 10 feet in a Mayo Clinic without hitting your head on a sign that says,
Right.
needs of the patient are only needs to be considered. And so in that regard, I'm sort of curious what the appetite is for even just giving partial subsidy to allow people to go elsewhere to get some of the needed health care. Because it really gets down to, I think the word is, what is it? How they categorize surgery, whether it's life or limb kind of thing. So hip replacement is not. So if you're bone on bone, it's not considered medically urgent, or I can't
Right.
recall the phrasing. But so I guess within that ethos and in their best interest, what is the appetite for subsidizing that?
I can answer that because we deal with every government in Canada quite regularly. I'm going to answer it this way. First of all, everybody in Canada knows the Mayo Clinic, and there's a heck of a lot of respect for what your organization is doing in Canada. And I think it is fundamentally changing a lot of the thinking in policymakers and regulators about what we're talking about here. And you have become a gold standard. And I think that Canadians really look to the Mayo Clinic for what you've done. I'll say this. To answer your question specifically, it depends on what province you go to. There are some provinces who are a lot more emancipated in terms of reimbursement for these kinds of issues. I look to provinces like Quebec and maybe Alberta as a good example. Your province, before you decided to change your government, Nolan, was probably a worthwhile place to look to that kind of an issue. Ontario is always the how do I say that? They are very interesting. It's a very interesting province. First of all, no policymaker, no regulator in Ontario is proactive. They're all reactive. So they're good if they see that there's an awful lot of this happening. I'll give you this as an example. We had a call. The Council Journal had said to us, "Oh, they're talking about this in Ottawa, and they're talking about this in Ontario, my province." And I got a call from a cabinet minister, and she said, "I'm prepared, Mark, for any patient that wants to go to Arizona to drive them to the airport and make sure they get on the plane and go down there because it's not going to cost my system any money." So you could see that I find it's fascinating. We've done work in Vietnam. And when I met with the Minister of Health in Vietnam, she said, we need to repatriate the $6.5 billion that's going out of my country for people who want to go get healthcare in other places. Ontario is the only place I know where they actually recommend that you get the hell out so that you could go get your healthcare in other places but pay for it. So there isn't a lot of I don't know, there's not a lot of support, we'll say, at the political level for this kind of move. But I'm going to say, and I'm not an optimist. I'm Irish Catholic and I love to fight. So I'm not an optimist. But I can tell you this, that it is going to happen. That in Canada, people are going to start to vote with their feet. And we were talking about this the other day. Just think about this for a second. There's an area in Ontario called the Great Cochrane Clay Belt. 2 degrees, there was an increase in 2 degrees in the climate there. And those 2 degrees in climate change, from whatever it was in Celsius to whatever it is now in Celsius, yielded 600% increase in the crop of naked oats and wheat in that area. Now, here's the interesting thing. That means that in places like Oklahoma and Nebraska, they may not be able, because of 2 degrees difference, they may not be able to grow wheat or naked oats. So it puts a huge opportunity and a spin, or a different spin, on how things are going to happen. I'm telling you, that is an analogy based on the fact that in Canada, we still have months where people should not be getting rehab or operations when it's bad weather like we have. So that kind of thing has to follow. And one of the former premiers of a well-known province in Canada, New Brunswick, had said, it is unconscionable that when you have the world is changing at internet speed, we still are in Canada staying close to a 55-year-old, 60-year-old healthcare system that hasn't changed much. So it's going to change, and it's going to take a lot of this kind of discussion and some leadership like this city to drive that forward. Keep doing what you're doing at Mayo Clinic, because we like you guys in Canada.
Yes, my name is Richard Fisk. I'm the CEO of Cobalt, and we have a rehabilitation hospital here in Surprise, and this has just been a marvelous venture for us. I'm sitting down because I want to tell you I just had spine surgery and I only had a 2-day wait.
Wow.
So, but the question is has anybody taken a look at the capacity of the healthcare providers here in the valley? Because we have probably the same problem, kind of reverse in that during those hot summer months, we're kind of lean. And then as the fall comes and the winter comes, we start filling up again, and now we're virtually full. But has anybody taken a look at the capacity of the healthcare providers to see if they could handle that?
That is a great question. That is a part of our feasibility process. So, one thing I didn't talk about, and there was a slide earlier that sort of spoke to it, is this is a feasibility process. So, what the task force has really assessed is that there's really 5 key areas, and one of those areas is determining the existing market. And we've talked about this offline. My suspicion is, and I'll do a Disneyland sort of example. My suspicion is that we're going to have to look at the existing ecosystem, make partnerships, and if there are non-Canadian facilities, obviously that are partners with us, it's almost like the Disneyland Good Neighbor Hotel concept that we have a variety of partners. And Dr. Wen also, I know will want to say something about that from a telemedicine perspective. But yes, I think that's crucial. We cannot, as a city, do this alone. The task force wants to make sure that this is a partnership process. So that is one part of the feasibility process, in addition to defining the market and figuring out what does the infrastructure look like? What does a Canadian standard, what does that look like? What does that cost? What does that, how does that feel? So there's a variety of issues that we're looking through, but that's one of the important ones.
So, Richard, that's a great question.
Yeah.
In fact, Janine and I been talking about that topic before. She may forget, but one of the strategy that we do, and then this is not a new strategy. I work at the Landstuhl, Germany Medical Center in the past, and whatever we do today is we already doing that as an American. Back in 2006, with doctor from here go to Germany, treat our own soldier for one disease, which is TBI, traumatic brain injury and burn. So this to me is not new. But one of the strategy to answer your question, Richard, we already in Chicago North, while waiting for Mark to finish his part. We already have that thought of, because Snowbird is not just Canadian, right? Snowbird is North. So we already there. And that's why, it's beautiful to see maybe some of the doctors down here have the same thinking, and maybe in the summer we should take a vacation in, Michigan or Ohio and do some work there, right? So I think that would be a better way to think of it. So
If I can jump in for 2 seconds, I have a question for Rhonda. So 2 days for a spinal operation here, 18 months in Canada. If that person's in pain on day one,
Ouch.
what happens prescription pill-wise between day 1 and 18 months?
We were actually just talking about that last night because of your mother, not spinal, but hip. So the spine, hip, any of those types of procedures, as the time expands before there's can be an intervention, we all know that the pain management is incredible. The medication management is incredible, but the dehabilitation in terms of the atrophy, et cetera, even if they do have a little bit of rehab prior to, is also very difficult for them. So as that time expands, one of the studies that's out there is the cost almost quadruples if it's like that 18-month period of time, because of the medications that have to occur and the post-op management that is needed, that is different than if there's earlier intervention.
Thank you very much.
Can I just Glenn, Richard, I want to be provocative to answer your question. And I'm going to say this, there is a thinking in Canada that healthcare costs in the United States are proportionately out of whack compared to healthcare costs in Canada. And so when you raised your question, I think your question that on the surface, it would be great if we could have interchange in between Canada and the United States. Let me give this as an example. If I'm a GP and I say my patient has a need for spinal surgery, and I know that it's going to be 18 months, and here's what's going to happen. Oftentimes they'll say, well, you could have that if you want to go and pay for it and get in the United States, go ahead. But we have these, commercials in Canada where they say, if you go down to the United States, first they're going to check your pulse, then they're going to check your wallet to see if you got enough money to do this. and we have to overcome that. So when we look at capacity issues, I think there's a huge opportunity, because I can tell you, you almost want to look at this market to say, all right, we have capacity here, you do, or others have capacity here, you do. And if you want to come down here to do this, this is the price that we think we could offer. And we do that right now between different hospitals. If somebody says, how much for an eye? And if you could do an eye at a heck of a lot cheaper, well, you're going to get that piece of business. So I think we want to put ourselves in the same thing. It goes right back to that whole argument about we're neighbors. And if we're talking about consular services, we gotta look at how we bridge all of the opportunities with capacity and even providers that we could have that kind of interchange. But we got a lot of training to do for Canadians to get them out of this thinking that you come down here and you pay $37,000 to get a mole taken off your face. In Canada, it's nothing. So that's the kind of issue that we're dealing with.
Can I just add to that one quick point?
Okay.
On the opportunity for collaboration, if there were a Canadian centre that has OHIP, from Ontario, provincial funding, all of a sudden you have Canadians looking to see healthcare delivery down here, but they may not want to use the doctor at the Canadian facility. They may have some extra money in their pocket and look then to other healthcare options. Once people, when you go to a car lot, you might be thinking you want one model, but once you get in the lot, you start looking at the others, and you might pay more to go across the street. I think there's going to be a natural cascading of opportunity, but it's about getting people. That's why do you see a restaurant? There's 10 restaurants all side by side. Once you show up, you might say, well, maybe pay a little more, but you go down the street. So I think you are naturally going to see that cascading into other facilities in the valley.
Another question from?
Thank you. Thank you for enlightening all of us on Canadian healthcare. My name is Rob Dawson. I'm a nurse practitioner hospitalist. So I specialize in patient care and vascular device insertions as well. So I'm part of Dr. Wynn's team. But I'm trying to understand the driver for this to happen. Conceptually, I think everyone thinks it's a great idea. But what specifically in Canada is going to drive the business in Surprise? Is it the fact that there's more capacity here or more providers, because the dollars are going to have to come from somewhere. And I understand that those with excess money can privately pay for expedited services, but will the global budgeting, is it just going to be diversion of those dollars, to programs outside of Canada? Because it seems like that's probably, like in every country, limited allocations for that. So,
I'm going to answer your question this way. When we first started talking about this, there are 274 hospitals in Canada.
Yeah.
And for all intents and purposes, this would be the 275th. That's the model.
I think we're technically a province now, aren't we?
I beg your pardon?
We're technically a province now. Should be conductors.
See, for me, I like to hear that, right? Because we all think that you guys are the best in the world.
And for me, the desire is it's. I have to touch on what Mark has just identified: capacity. In Canada, the nations are negotiating a we have opportunity to negotiate, but we don't have capacity to deliver. So I look at this as a fantastic model to say, you know what, we can negotiate as nations an opportunity like this, but we need to learn from our neighbors, and we need from our neighbors the capacity to run something like this. So there's ample opportunity for the nations in Canada, but there's no capacity. So I look at this as a great model to learn from, how do we develop capacity for our nations back home.
Another question?
Hi, I'm David Levesque. I'm on the task force, and I didn't watch John Wayne when I was young, but other people in my life reminded me that a lot of the John Wayne films were filmed here in Arizona. And so the story of America is we want to be the hero. And as I listened to you all talk last night about your own personal stories, which are driving you to do things with your careers and your experiences with healthcare, which is what's driving me, I'm just wondering if each of you, or those of you that told your stories, are willing to share your stories about why Arizona can be the hero in your lives based on having this opportunity here. Specifically around the healthcare stories that you, if you're willing to share.
I'm happy to jump in. So my own healthcare story, and I'll try to be brief. I have a condition called CF, cystic fibrosis, which is, when I was born, was serious. It still is. Life expectancy was 6 when I was born in 69. Now it's, I think, in the mid 50s, and I'm 48. I've had healthcare has done well to date in Canada. The challenge is, and what the Canadian system hasn't been able to meet, this doesn't quite have to do with the Surprise Hospital, but it's on medication. Biologics, which are the new drug treatments that are coming out. Canada has not yet been able to deal effectively with how to fund and access biologics. So I'm on a medication right now that's my private insurance in Canada pays for it or covers it. Kalydeco, it's $250,000 a year. I was on 4 liters of oxygen a minute in 2012 when I had a real drop in health. Managed to, it's a company out of Boston, Vertex Pharmaceuticals, that's developed it. 2012, 30% of pulmonary function. Then get out on this drug. I'm now, as you see today, I'm 30 pounds heavier, lung function 30% higher, about 60%. When I get off the plane in Phoenix, the quality of air is dramatically, it's too humid in Eastern Canada and the Eastern Seaboard. The dry, clear, clean air, it's liberating. It's very, so as a personal anecdote, I can tell you that. I can also tell you, though, that I think the U.S. system, and I'm not an expert, I'm a lawyer, not a healthcare expert, but I think the U.S. far more effectively than Canada ensures access to these biologic and life-saving drugs. Canada, we haven't got our head around that properly. I know that from what I understand, everyone who has CF in the U.S. Has access to both Kalydeco, which is the 2012 version of this drug, and Orkambi, which is the new one, that needs it. You've got more of a mixed because of so many different private providers, but they have access. And it was approved within weeks of being filed. Whereas in Canada, Vertex filed and it hasn't been done. We're not here to talk about medication, but just you asked about a personal anecdote. So I can tell you that the quality of air and the fact there is no humidity is life-saving when you have CF or asthma or other conditions like that. I'm sure the same in the ortho crowd.
Great. I think we're gonna pull the plug on the questions. We're at a hard stop unless someone's got a burning question. Nobody? Well, we have one last question.
One last question.
Try to make it real quick. This is for Mark. If that orthopedic physician who's only doing surgery 1 day a week, why is he only doing surgery 1 day a week if there's such a long wait list. I saw there's a shortage of physicians. Is that the issue? Is funds the issue? And what can we do to help?
Is this
that?
televised?
It is.
I'll tell you. I go back to my point, Mary, about the fact that again, as a former hospital administrator, you have to make decisions on where you put your resources. And orthopedics, if we look at it like we talked earlier on, doesn't necessarily have especially bone on bone. It doesn't necessarily have the kind of how should we say this, priority. So I'm just going to say this in Canada because they've been calling us. There are a lot of underemployed orthopedic surgeons in Canada who are based on global budgeting and the process by which you get OR time. So it's a nasty way to operate a system. But because of that, here's the other issue. Global budgeting also predetermines how many hips or how many knees you're allowed to buy as a hospital. So I'm only allowed to buy 63 hips or knees. So when you look at that, what if you're 64? And anybody over the age of 55, I'm a former football player too, and I got to tell you, everybody needs a new knee at some point. If you've been like me, and except if you play football here at Ottawa, I hear they're not a very good team. But anyway, so my point is that these are the kinds of things that we have to look at constantly. So that is a very horrible program or process back in Canada. There was the Minister of Health nationally had made a comment where she said, "I'm not going to allow physicians to double dip by going down to Arizona to do this." My phone rang off the hook saying, "I want to come down to Arizona, Mark." So we now have 23 orthopedic surgeons in Canada prepared to come down here to practice if the feasibility works.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll take no more questions from the audience. Ladies and gentlemen of the panel, thank you very, very much. Let's give them a round of applause.